Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe my channel. Enjoy the listening. They exiled the last human boy to die. But the dragons crowned him king. The chamber of the Galactic Tribunal was vast, its ceiling stretching beyond sight, lined with shimmering orbs that represented the many worlds of the council. The accused stood in the center of the grand hall, a single boy, frail yet unbroken, surrounded by towering alien dignitaries, whose glowing eyes bore down upon him like judgmental stars. Milo kept his head high, though his hands were bound in energy that hummed with containment fields. His clothing was torn, his face, smeared with the remnants of struggle, yet his eyes, defiant and clear, never wavered. He was the last human, the only survivor of a species the Council had deemed too volatile to exist. Humanity was given its chance, intoned by High Arbiter Siox, whose deep, layered voice echoed through the hall. His elongated, silver-skinned form pulsed faintly as he gestured to the vast congregation, saying, "And it squandered that chance, its wars were endless, its ambitions unyielding. The human species burned entire worlds in its hunger. Now, only you remain, Milo Adair, and we cannot risk allowing you to infect the galaxy with your kind's recklessness." Milo swallowed hard, his throat dry, yet he had heard the rumors, the fearful whispers that had followed him from station to station, world to world, the last one, the last mistake. He had tried to survive quietly, to prove them wrong, but it didn't matter, the Council had already written humanity's final chapter. A smaller being, clad in a ceremonial mantle of glowing sigils, stepped forward, a Kathari scribe entrusted with recording verdicts that would last millennia. "The Council has reached a unanimous decision," it announced in a voice as cold as distant moons. "You are to be exiled to the dragon planets." The chamber erupted in murmurs. Even among these cold-hearted aliens, there were whispers of doubt, of curiosity. The dragon planets were no ordinary exile, they were a sentence of death. Milo clenched his fists as a massive reptilian figure, the Tsar representative, rumbled in approval. Fittingly, the warlord growled, his sharp teeth glinting in the dim light, "Let the last human face creatures more fearsome than his ancestors ever were, perhaps the beasts will finish what we started." The energy cuffs tightened around Milo's wrists. There would be no trial, no escape, only the cold void of space and a descent into a world teeming with monsters. He refused to let them see his fear. Instead, he turned his gaze upward to the vast galactic map hovering above the tribunal, where a single red dot marked his fate, Draconus Prime, the deadliest of the dragon planets. "Fine, Milo," he said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart, "send me there, but don't act surprised when you regret it." The council members exchanged looks, unreadable in their alien expressions, then without another word the guards activated the teleportation ring, and the world around Milo collapsed into light. Milo crashed into the world of Draconus Prime with fire and fury. The pod they had thrown him into burned through the thick atmosphere, its metal shell glowing bright as it was dragged down by the immense gravity of the planet. The impact shook the earth, sending a wave of molten dust and shattered rock into the sky. He barely registered the pain as the restraints disengaged and the pod's hatch blasted open, expelling him onto the scorched ground. Heat waves shimmered around him, the air thick with the smell of sulfur, and the distant rumble of something massive moving through the shadows. Gritting his teeth, Milo forced himself to his feet. The ground beneath him was hot enough to sear his boots, the sky above was a deep, eternal red, and twin suns cast jagged shadows across a landscape of volcanic ridges and obsidian cliffs, a prison, a graveyard. He refused to die here. His hands shook as he rummaged through the emergency kit left inside the pod, a small water canister, a dull survival knife, and a cracked data pad, barely functional but enough to display his coordinates. No weapons, no means of escape, the council hadn't even given him a chance. A deep, guttural roar echoed from somewhere far off. Milo stiffened. The sound was unnatural, something that belonged to a predator beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. He turned slowly, his breath catching in his throat, as he saw the silhouette of a dragon perched atop a distant ridge, its massive form outlined against the burning sky. It was watching him. Milo felt the weight of its ancient, piercing gaze, something intelligent, something hungry. Then, in a flash of black wings and a gust of smoldering wind, it was gone. He exhaled sharply, muscles tense. He wasn't alone, he needed shelter, fast. Scanning the horizon, he spotted a jagged rock formation that jutted out like a ruined fortress. It wasn't much, but it was high ground, and if there was one thing Milo knew, it was that staying on the ground in unfamiliar territory got you killed. He forced his aching body forward, ignoring the way the heat drained his strength. Every step felt heavier, as if the planet itself wanted to pull him down to bury him in its unforgiving embrace. By the time he reached the base of the formation, the sky had darkened to a dusky crimson twilight. That was when he heard it, a second roar, closer. Milo's blood ran cold. He turned just as a shadow descended upon him, the wind whipping against his skin, as a massive form crashed into the ground before him, sending a shock wave through the earth. The dragon was unlike anything he had imagined, not just a beast, but something otherworldly. Its scales shifted between black and deep violet, reflecting the dying light in an eerie shimmer, its eyes burned gold, filled with something beyond mere animal instinct, locked onto him. Milo didn't move, didn't breathe. If he ran, he was dead. The dragon let out a low, rumbling growl, its nostrils flaring as it took a step forward, testing him, measuring him, deciding whether he was prey. He had one chance. Instinctively, Milo spoke, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'm not here to fight you." The dragon paused. A deep silence stretched between them, the crackling embers of the scorched earth the only sound. Then something shifted in the air, something invisible yet powerful. The dragon's head lowered slightly, its massive frame still coiled like a loaded weapon, but its golden eyes softened. Milo exhaled shakily. It had understood him, and in that moment, something clicked inside him, an understanding that shouldn't have been possible. He wasn't just hearing the dragon, he was feeling it, the tension, the curiosity, the deep, aching loneliness beneath its ancient strength. And just like that, he realized the truth, he wasn't here to survive Draconis Prime, he was here to become a part of it. The council had exiled him, but they had no idea what they had done. They had sent the last human boy to the dragon planets, only to discover he was their whisperer. Milo's pulse hammered in his ears as he stood frozen beneath the dragon's piercing, golden gaze. The sheer enormity of the creature made the air feel heavy, its presence swallowing everything else in the moment. The dragon's wings shifted slightly, the dark violet membranes catching the dim light of the dying twin suns. It exhaled, sending a wave of blistering heat over Milo's skin, but the fire in its breath was restrained, a warning, not an attack. He should have been dead by now, and yet he wasn't. Milo swallowed hard, his hands trembling at his sides. He had always heard stories before the fall of humanity of monstrous creatures that stalked the edges of the known universe, but nothing had ever prepared him for a being that was more than just a predator, more than just a mindless beast. It was aware, and somehow, in a way he couldn't explain, Milo felt it. Not just the presence of the dragon before him, but something deeper, a flicker of thought, a feeling barely brushing the edges of his mind. It was unlike anything he had ever known, a connection that didn't belong to words but to something more primal, something older than language itself. The dragon tilted its head, considering him. There was no malice in its gaze, but there was curiosity and intelligence that sent a shiver down Milo's spine. He didn't run, he didn't even flinch. Instead, he did something that should have been suicide, he stepped forward. The dragon tensed, its massive claws digging into the scorched earth. A deep rumble rolled from its chest, a sound that could have been a growl or something else entirely, but Milo didn't stop. Everything in him screamed that this should be impossible, that he was standing before a beast that had swallowed entire sky ships whole, that had sent alien warriors fleeing in terror. And yet, the closer he got, the stronger the strange sensation became, a pulse in his mind, a rhythm he could almost hear beneath his own thoughts. Slowly, carefully, he reached out. The dragon stared, its nostrils flaring as it inhaled his scent, as if trying to understand him in the same way he was trying to understand it. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the dragon lowered its head. It was a simple motion, yet it sent a shock wave through Milo's entire being. He could barely breathe as his fingers brushed against the scales along the dragon's snout, the surface smooth like obsidian, yet warm, alive. A jolt shot through him, an undeniable recognition that made his stomach twist. It wasn't just a dragon, it was sentient, and it had just chosen not to kill him. For the first time since arriving on Draconis Prime, Milo felt something other than fear, he felt purpose. Milo barely slept that night. The dragon remained near the rock formation he had chosen as shelter, its golden eyes watching him even as the twin suns dipped beneath the horizon, plunging the world into darkness. It didn't leave, didn't return to whatever depths it had come from, instead, it lingered, resting its massive form against the volcanic stone, as if waiting for something. Milo wasn't sure what he was supposed to do. He had spent his entire life surviving in a galaxy that didn't want him, a stray human among alien civilizations that saw his kind as nothing more than a dangerous mistake. He had never belonged anywhere, and yet, when the dragon looked at him, there was no hate, no rejection, only understanding. It was the first thing in his life that hadn't tried to push him away. As the night deepened, the air cooled, the overwhelming heat of the planet giving way to a thin, biting chill. Milo sat near the dying embers of his small fire, watching the dragon as it shifted its wings, curling its tail around itself like a living fortress. Something in him ached at the sight. He wasn't alone, for the first time in years he wasn't alone. His fingers traced patterns in the dust absently as he thought about what had happened earlier, that strange connection, the sensation of thought, of feeling moving between them. Was it real, or was he just losing his mind from the stress of being abandoned here? There was only one way to find out. Milo took a deep breath and closed his eyes, focusing, reaching for whatever it was that had stirred inside him before the moment his mind brushed against the presence of the dragon. It was like stepping into a storm, a surge of raw, unfiltered power coursed through him. Not words, not speech, but emotion. He felt hunger, weariness, a lingering sense of curiosity, as if the dragon itself was trying to understand him just as much as he was trying to understand it. Milo's breath hitched. This wasn't just a feeling, it was a language, one that had nothing to do with sound and everything to do with intent. He tried to focus, to send something back to shape his thoughts the way the dragon did, and then, without warning, a voice not his own rumbled through his mind, "You are not afraid." Milo's eyes snapped open. He jerked back, gasping for breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. The dragon hadn't moved, hadn't spoken aloud, yet it had spoken. Milo looked at the massive creature before him, his pulse racing. "You can talk," he whispered. The dragon exhaled, its golden eyes narrowing slightly, not with words, but, "You hear me." Milo's entire body trembled. He wasn't insane, it was real. He swallowed, trying to steady his breathing, as the dragon's gaze held his. And for the first time, he felt something else beneath its towering strength, amusement. "I was going to ask you the same thing," Milo let out a breathless, almost hysterical laugh. This wasn't happening, it couldn't be happening. He had been sentenced to death on a planet of monsters, and instead he had just spoken to one. The council had exiled him here, thinking he would be devoured, expecting him to be erased from history, but they had been wrong. He wasn't a prisoner, he wasn't a mistake. He was something else entirely. Milo looked at the dragon before him, realization settling deep in his bones. They hadn't sent him here to die, they had sent him home. Milo awoke to the first light of the twin suns painting the sky in a wash of crimson and gold. The air was still, save for the slow, rhythmic breathing of the dragon beside him. It hadn't left. That realization settled deep in his chest, heavier than anything he had ever known. For the first time in his life, something had chosen to stay. He sat up slowly, feeling the stiffness in his limbs, the ache in his muscles from the tension of the previous day. He had survived the night that alone should have been a miracle, and yet it wasn't the near-death experience that unsettled him, it was the voice, the way the dragon had spoken without speaking, the way its thoughts had brushed against his like a tide sweeping over the shore. The dragon shifted slightly, stretching its massive wings before folding them again, its golden eyes cracking open just enough to regard him. The weight of its gaze sent a shiver down Milo's spine. "You are still here," it observed, not as a question but as an acknowledgement. Milo swallowed, forcing himself to hold that gaze. "So are you." The dragon made a sound, something between a deep exhale and a low, rumbling chuckle. "You are different." Milo wasn't sure how to respond to that. He had spent his life being told exactly what he was, a mistake, an anomaly, a dangerous remnant of a species that should have been wiped out. But now, for the first time, someone, something, was looking at him as if he was something else entirely, something worth understanding. "You didn't kill me," Milo said finally. "Why?" The dragon studied him, its eyes narrowing slightly as if considering its own answer. "Because you did not run." Milo felt his breath hitch. It was such a simple statement, and yet it cut deeper than he expected. He hadn't run for so long, his life had been dictated by the fear of the council, of the alien civilizations that hated what he was, of the vast, indifferent universe that had cast him aside. And yet, in the face of a creature that could have ended him in an instant, he had stood his ground, and now that choice had changed everything. The dragon's voice curled through his thoughts again, softer this time. "You are not like the others who came before." Milo frowned. "Others," he repeated, a slow, deliberate pause, "then the ones who feared us." A chill ran down his spine. Milo had grown up hearing the legends of the dragon planets, how they were death worlds, places where no being had ever returned from. But the way the dragon spoke, the weight behind those words, it wasn't just talking about predators and survival, it was talking about betrayal. Milo's hands clenched into fists. "What did they do to you?" For a moment, the dragon said nothing. Then it turned its gaze toward the horizon, where the landscape stretched endlessly beneath the rising suns. "They broke the bond." Milo had no idea what that meant, but he was going to find out. The dragon moved with a grace that shouldn't have been possible for something its size, its body weaving effortlessly through the jagged cliffs, as if the land itself was an extension of its being. Milo followed, struggling to keep up, his boots slipping against the loose volcanic rock. He didn't know where they were going, the dragon hadn't said, but there was a pull, an unspoken understanding that something awaited ahead. The path led them through a canyon, the walls carved with deep gouges and claw marks, massive and deliberate. This place had seen battle and violence, the air itself felt heavier here, thick with the echoes of something long buried. Milo felt the weight of the silence pressing against his mind, as if the very bones of the planet were whispering forgotten things. He glanced up at the dragon, and for the first time, he saw something in its golden eyes that he hadn't before, grief. "You lost something here," Milo murmured. The dragon slowed its gaze, drifting over the canyon walls. "Not something," it paused, "someone." Milo swallowed hard. He had known loss, he had lived in the shadow of it, but the way the dragon spoke, as if it carried the weight of centuries, made his own grief feel small in comparison. The dragon finally stopped before an ancient structure, half buried beneath the shifting sands of time. It was massive, built of dark stone and metal, its surface etched with symbols Milo had never seen before. But the strangest part wasn't the building itself, it was the statues, rows upon rows of stone figures, their features eerily human-like but elongated, alien, and at the center of them all, a colossal carving of a dragon, its wings outstretched as if ready to take flight. Milo stared, his pulse quickening. "What is this place?" The dragon exhaled, its voice a whisper in his mind, "It is a sanctuary." Milo turned to face it, confusion knotting in his chest, for when the dragon's golden eyes met his, in that instant, something passed between them, a flood of images, of memories not his own. He saw a world where dragons and beings like him, humanoid, but different, more advanced, lived together, fought together. He saw cities where the sky was filled with the shapes of dragons, not as predators but as partners. And then he saw fire, he saw betrayal, he saw the bond shattered. Milo gasped, staggering back as the visions faded. He pressed a hand against his forehead, his breath ragged. They were with you. They were your allies, the dragon intoned. Its wings shifted in a slow, mournful motion. They were our riders. Milo's mind reeled. The council had told him that no one had survived the dragon planets, that every species that had ever set foot here had perished. But the truth was something far more terrible. They hadn't just died here, they had broken something sacred. You trusted them? Milo murmured. A long silence followed, then the dragon's voice, heavy with something that might have been sorrow, yes. Milo clenched his fists. He could feel the weight of history pressing against him, the untold story of a civilization that had been erased, of a bond that had been severed. And suddenly, he understood why the dragon hadn't killed him, why it had listened instead of striking him down, because once, a long time ago, humans, or something close enough to them, had stood by these creatures' sides. And now, after centuries of silence, Milo was the first to stand before them again. His voice was quiet when he spoke, but there was a promise in his words, I won't break it. The dragon studied him, its golden eyes unreadable. Then, for the first time, it spoke, not in words, but in something deeper, a feeling, a thread of understanding, a bond. And Milo knew it had accepted him. The air inside the ancient sanctuary was thick with time, with the weight of forgotten history pressing down on every crumbling stone and cracked inscription. The dragon stood still beside Milo, its great form barely illuminated by the dim light filtering through the broken ceiling. The statues of riders and dragons alike loomed over them, silent witnesses to a past that had been buried beneath centuries of dust and betrayal. Milo ran his fingers over the cold stone, tracing the worn symbols carved into the wall. The images were unmistakable, beings like him, humanoid but taller, sleeker, standing side by side with dragons. Some held spears tipped with burning light, others knelt with their foreheads touching those of their dragons, in a gesture that spoke of something deeper than command. It was not subjugation, it was kinship. You weren't just their allies, Milo murmured, the realization settling deep into his bones, you were bonded to them. The dragon let out a low rumble, a sound that vibrated through the chamber like a distant storm. The bond was sacred, it said, its voice brushing against Milo's thoughts with the weight of 1,000 lost voices. It was our oath, our purpose. Milo exhaled sharply, his mind spinning. If the bond had been so sacred, why had it been broken? He turned to the dragon, eyes sharp with the question burning inside him, what happened to them? A pause, a heavy silence, then the dragon spoke, its voice quiet but laced with something deeper, something that sent a shiver down Milo's spine. They left us. Milo's breath hitched. Not killed, not wiped out by war, they abandoned the dragons. A surge of emotion flooded through him, not entirely his own, rage, sorrow, betrayal so deep it felt like an open wound that had never healed. The dragons had not simply lost their riders, they had been forsaken by them. Milo clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. Why? He demanded. The dragon exhaled, slow and measured, as if choosing its words carefully, they feared what we had become. Milo frowned, trying to understand. The bond had made them stronger, closer than any other species in the galaxy had ever been. How could something so powerful turn to fear? The dragon shifted, lowering its massive head until its golden eyes were level with Milo's. The bond was not one-sided, we gave them our strength, but we took something in return. Milo felt his stomach tighten. What did you take? The dragon was silent for a long time. Then finally it said, we shared their souls. Milo sucked in a breath, his heart pounding. The bond between dragon and rider hadn't just been about trust or companionship, it had been deeper than blood, deeper than anything physical. It had been a merging, a sharing of thoughts, emotions, and essence itself. And for a species that had once sought power and control over the universe, something that had likely been terrifying, they left because they were afraid of losing themselves. Milo whispered, the weight of the truth settling over him like a crushing force. The dragon did not answer. It didn't need to. Milo turned his gaze back to the stone carvings, to the riders who had once stood alongside these magnificent creatures. He felt something deep in his chest, a grief that did not belong to him alone. Then, slowly, he raised his hand and pressed it against the dragon's snout. "I won't leave you," he said, the words heavy with meaning. "I swear it." A long silence stretched between them. Then, for the first time, the dragon bowed its head, and Milo knew the bond was no longer broken, not for him, not anymore. The sky burned red with the light of the twin suns as Milo stood atop the highest ridge, the wind whipping through his hair, his body alive with something new, something ancient. The dragon, his dragon, stood beside him, its massive form coiled and ready, golden eyes locked on the horizon where a threat approached. The sentinels had come far in the distance, dark shapes cut across the sky, their sleek, metallic forms unnatural against the backdrop of Draconis Prime's wild, untamed beauty. They weren't of this world, they had never belonged here, the alien enforcers of the council, the very ones who had exiled Milo, were descending like carrion birds, their purpose clear, they had come to finish what they had started. Milo's grip tightened around the hilt of his knife, though he knew the weapon was worthless against the technology they wielded. The sentinels were not organic, they were cold, unfeeling machines programmed to eliminate threats, and to them, he was the greatest threat of all, the last human boy, the Whisperer, a survivor who had done more than just live. He had awakened something the galaxy had long since buried. The sentinels would not allow that. The dragon beside him growled, its wings flaring as if sensing the coming battle, its mind brushing against Milo's in a silent question, "Do we fight?" Milo's chest rose and fell with steady breaths. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore, he was fighting for every dragon who had been forsaken, for the bond that had been severed, for the future that had been stolen from them. Turning to the dragon, with fierce determination burning in his eyes, he said, "We don't run. Not this time." The dragon's golden eyes gleamed with something primal, something fierce. Then, without hesitation, it lowered itself, allowing Milo to climb onto its back. The moment his hands found purchase against the dragon's scales, he felt it again, that connection, deeper than thought, a flood of understanding that went beyond words. He wasn't just riding a dragon, he was one with it. As one, they moved. The dragon leapt into the sky, wings beating against the air as they soared toward the oncoming sentinels. The wind roared past Milo's ears, but he didn't feel fear. He felt alive. And as the first sentinel ships locked onto them, their weapons charging, Milo spoke, not with words, but with his mind, and the dragons of Draconis Prime answered. From the canyons, from the mountains, from the deepest caverns of the world, they rose, dragons of every shape and size, their scales glinting in the twin sunlight, their roars shaking the very core of the planet. They had been forgotten, they had been abandoned, but not anymore. Milo lifted his gaze, his heart pounding, as his dragon let out a roar that shook the heavens. The council had thought they were sending him to die, instead, they had sent him to awaken an empire. And now, as the sky filled with fire and wings, as the war machines of the council met the fury of creatures long thought lost, the last human boy led the charge. The moment Milo and his dragon surged toward the sentinel ships, the air itself seemed to ignite with the fury of a battle that had been waiting for millennia to begin. The sentinels, cold and efficient, adjusted their formations instantly, their sleek, metallic bodies shifting into attack mode. Their weapons powered up with a deadly hum, energy building in their cores, targeting systems locking onto the living creatures they had never anticipated would fight back. Milo's grip tightened around the dragon's scales, the heat of the battle already charging the air around them. The sensation in his mind, the link between him and his dragon, had grown stronger, clearer. He didn't just sense his dragon's emotions anymore, he felt its instincts as if they were his own. As the first blast streaked through the sky, his body reacted before he could think. His dragon twisted in midair, wings snapping tight, spiraling between the burning streaks of energy. Milo didn't have to direct it, he and the dragon were moving as one, their instincts blending into a single purpose. Below them, the other dragons answered the call from the ridges and volcanic plains. They launched themselves into the sky, a force of fury and fire that the sentinels had never accounted for. A deep, rumbling roar filled the heavens, and the dragons struck. They moved faster than any war machine, weaving through the sky like liquid flame. The sentinels fired their weapons, slicing through the air, but the dragons were creatures of the storm, unpredictable, untamed. They did not fight with tactics, they fought with instinct, with the memory of what had been stolen from them. Milo felt their emotions as they surged into battle, rage, grief, determination, and beneath it all one singular thought burned in their minds: they would not be abandoned again. Milo's dragon climbed higher, dodging a barrage of plasma fire, its golden eyes locking onto one of the lead sentinel ships. The moment stretched between them, silent and electric. Then, without a single word, they dove. The wind tore at Milo's face as they plummeted toward the sentinel ship, which grew larger, its cannons twisting to track them. He could hear the shrill alarms of the enemy vessel, a war of an impact that had no way of stopping. At the last moment, Milo's dragon flared its wings, tilting its massive body just enough to skim past the ship's hull, and as they passed, Milo reached out, not with his hands, but with the power he barely understood. The bond between him and the dragons flared white-hot, something surging from within him, flowing outward. Then the sentinel systems flickered. Milo felt it: the machine wasn't just metal and circuits, it had a mind, a synthetic intelligence buried deep inside its core, one that had never been meant to hear the voice of a human. But Milo spoke to it anyway. The sentinel hesitated, its weapons dipped, its cannons faltering for half a second. It was enough. The second dragon struck like a meteor, its claws tearing through the ship's weakened plating, flames bursting from its engines. The sentinel spiraled downward, crashing into the mountains below. Milo gasped, his mind reeling from what he had just done. The dragons around him felt it too. The Whisperer wasn't just their ally, he could speak to their enemies, and the battle had only just begun. The sentinel fleet tried to regroup, their formations tightened, their weapons recalibrated, they adapted, but they had already lost control of the battle. The dragons, once thought extinct, were everywhere. Now, their roars shattered the sky, their flames turned metal into molten wreckage. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for vengeance, for the bonds that had been broken, for the centuries of silence and abandonment. Milo's dragon circled high above the battlefield, its wings outstretched, its golden eyes watching the last remnants of the enemy fleet. Milo could feel its emotions through the bond they shared, not just anger, not just battle fury, but a question: what happens now? Milo's chest tightened. The council would never stop. They had cast him here to die, to be forgotten, and now he had done the one thing they feared most. He had become something they could never control. The last human wasn't dead, he was leading the oldest empire the galaxy had ever known. A warning blared from the sky. Milo looked up, more sentinel ships were approaching. They weren't engaging in battle, they were pulling back, retreating. His breath slowed. They weren't withdrawing because they had been defeated, they were leaving to report back. The council now knew the truth. Milo exhaled, watching as the last of the sentinels vanished beyond the clouds, their dark ships retreating toward the void. The battle was over for now, but the war was only just beginning. His dragon lowered its head slightly, sensing the shift in his thoughts. "They will return," it murmured. Milo nodded, "I know." But now he wasn't alone. The bond had been restored, and as long as he lived, the dragons would never be abandoned again. As the dawn broke over Draconis Prime, casting the world in golden light, Milo knew one thing with certainty: he had been exiled to the dragon planets as a prisoner, but now he stood among legends, not the last of his kind, but the first of something new.